Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we sift through all the noise to bring you, well, the most important nuggets of knowledge and some really surprising insights, custom tailored just for you. Today, we're taking on a really fascinating observation that you shared with us. It's this feeling, right, that in our modern digital world, we seem to be experiencing an uptick in both empathy and arrogance simultaneously. You wondered if the sheer volume of information we all have access to now actually boosts our confidence. And that confidence then kind of takes a fork in the road. Sometimes it leads to deeper empathy, which is great. But other times, maybe when it all just gets too much, it tips over into annoyance or even, arrogance, especially as you pointed out in places like anonymous online forums or, and I love this, behind a car's wheel. It's such a sharp observation. So I'm really excited to explore if this is actually happening and, what's really driving it all.
It is an absolute compelling puzzle you've highlighted, a real psychological tangle. Because, on the surface, empathy and arrogance feel like total opposites, don't they?
Completely, yeah.
But the more we dig in, the more it looks like they might actually be two sides of the same rapidly evolving cultural coin. So for this deep dive, we're going to use 4 distinct lenses, basically, to try and understand why these seemingly contradictory traits could be thriving together.
Okay, 4 lenses. Let's unpack this. Why are these opposing traits rising together? What's the core dynamic here?
Well, it fundamentally comes down to how we've all started interacting with information and, well, with each other in this digital age. So the first lens is all about access to information and the illusion of expertise. The internet, as you know, it's given us this incredible, almost infinite ocean of knowledge. And on the plus side, that's fostered amazing awareness, real compassion for global issues, social justice, mental health, you name it. We see more and often we genuinely feel more.
Right.
But here's the twist. It also gives rise to something called epistemic arrogance.
Epistemic arrogance. What's that exactly?
It's that confidence you get from having just enough knowledge to feel certain, but maybe not quite enough to be truly humble about what you don't know. Think about it. You can read a few articles online, maybe see a viral infographic, scroll through a really compelling social media thread.
Yeah, happens all the time.
Right. And you form a strong opinion, maybe quite quickly, and suddenly feel totally equipped to argue it with absolute conviction. It's that classic Dunning-Kruger effect playing out where limited knowledge can lead to this overestimated sense of competence.
Especially when complex stuff gets flattened into those, hot takes.
Exactly. So the key insight here is, while empathy might grow because we're exposed to more of others' pain, arrogance often grows when we think we fully grasp that pain just from a distance, without the depth of actual lived experience.
That makes so much sense. It's like seeing just the tip of the iceberg and confidently describing the whole thing. Okay, so what's the second lens?
Our second lens zeroes in on cognitive overload leading to empathy fatigue or even sometimes frustration. Social media, the 24/7 news cycle. It's made us hyper-aware of constant global suffering.
Yeah.
Wars, injustice, climate change, crises everywhere, all the time.
It's relentless.
It is. And while this can expand our empathic range, it also just incredibly wears us down. We can develop what psychologists call compassion fatigue, especially when we feel pretty helpless to actually do anything about these huge systemic problems.
Yeah, that feeling of powerlessness.
Right. Imagine your brain trying to process every single tragedy simultaneously. It can't sustain that level of emotional output indefinitely. And what happens then? Well, people often oscillate, right? They swing between caring really deeply about massive global issues one minute and then snapping, maybe disproportionately, at really minor annoyances the next. You might genuinely grieve for human rights abuses happening halfway across the world, but then find yourself just erupting with frustration at, say, a slow barista.
Oh, I absolutely see that whiplash effect.
Yeah. Exactly. That emotional whiplash, that mismatch between the macro-level caring and the micro-level irritation, it often creates a kind of defensive emotional reaction, maybe detachment or irritability, or, even a sort of arrogance as a shield.
Okay, that tracks. That rapid shift from deep care to intense annoyance. What's behind that dynamic? What's number 3?
Well, a big piece of it is our third lens, concealed identity leading to low accountability and high projection. This is where your observation about online forums or being behind the wheel of a car really shines.
Yeah.
When you're anonymous or just distanced from immediate face-to-face consequences, it absolutely disinhibits aggressive or arrogant behavior.
Road rage, online trolls. Yep.
Precisely. Those contexts strip away all the crucial social cues we normally rely on. Facial expressions, tone of voice, body language, the things that usually moderate how we act towards each other. Without that immediate feedback loop, we can kind of project this version of confidence or maybe dominance that ironically often masks a much deeper vulnerability. As one of our sources put it, what we might really be feeling is insecure, overwhelmed, or lonely. But we perform confidence or superiority as a defense.
Wow.
It's that little inner monologue whispering, I'll show them how smart I am or how right I am or how unbothered I am, even when maybe you're actually seething inside.
That's a really powerful thought, that the arrogance we see, especially online or in traffic, could just be a mask, a defense mechanism. Okay, and the fourth lens.
The fourth lens is about how social media algorithms drive both empathy signals and echo chambers. These platforms, they're brilliantly designed in a way to reward us for broadcasting our empathy. Well, retweeting a tragic story, sharing an infographic about a cause, publicly stating your moral stance on something. The platforms reward that visibility. The tricky part is they often reward the signal of empathy more than they reward actual, tangible action. And this can lead to what people call performative empathy or virtue signaling. The display itself kind of becomes the main act.
Got it, the performance of caring.
Exactly. And at the very same time, these algorithms are constantly pushing us into echo chambers.
Right.
They reinforce our existing beliefs. They give us that immediate social validation, likes, upvotes, shares, and that makes us feel incredibly confident, sometimes even arrogant in our views because, well, everyone around us seems to agree.
Yeah, the bubble effect.
Precisely. So you can see how in these online spaces, empathy can almost become like a brand you curate. And arrogance, surprisingly, can almost function as a form of credibility within your specific bubble.
That's a really potent framework. It connects a lot of dots, especially that idea of empathy as a brand. But is this just a feeling? Or is there actual evidence that both of these things are rising?
Oh, the evidence is increasingly clear, yeah. Studies are definitely pointing to an increase in what's called moral grandstanding online.
Moral grandstanding?
Yeah, those really public displays of outrage or moral superiority that seem aimed, at least partly, at boosting the person's own social standing. We also see rising confidence in political and social opinions, sometimes from people without, deep expertise on really complex issues. And yes, absolutely, there's evidence of growing empathy for certain outgroups in some areas, likely driven by that increased awareness we talked about.
There's a downside, too.
Definitely. Conversely, there's also a noticeable rise in desensitization, even aggression, probably due to just constant exposure to distressing stuff and the depersonalization that happens so easily online. So, the crucial takeaway here is that empathy and arrogance aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. They might be sequential.
How do you mean?
Like, you might feel empathy first, then get overwhelmed, and then react with arrogance. Or it could be context-dependent, empathetic in one situation, arrogant in another. Or maybe they're even intertwined coping mechanisms for just trying to navigate this hyper-connected, emotionally intense world we're in.
Okay. Coping mechanisms. That makes sense. So if this is where we are now, I'm really curious, how exactly did we get here to this specific psychological moment? I feel like to really get a handle on it, we need to trace things back a bit. Look at the evolution of information access, social trust, media, identity over the last few decades, before the digital age fully kicked in.
Absolutely. Thinking about the history is key. Let's think of it as a journey. We can break it down decade by decade, sort of setting the stage for when the internet really arrived and changed everything.
Okay, lead the way.
Let's start back in the 1970s, the era of skepticism and social awakening. This was a time, remember, when the idealism of the 60s kind of crashed headlong into a much harsher reality. You had Watergate, the end of Vietnam, oil crises, serious inflation.
Right, a lot of disillusionment.
Exactly. And media was very centralized. Just 3 major TV networks, the big established newspapers, no internet, obviously. So, confidence back then, generally moderate to low, especially trust in big institutions like the government or other authority figures. People were pretty distrustful. But personal confidence, that was often more localized, rooted in your immediate community, your family, maybe your job security. And empathy was similar. Less global, much more focused on the community. You cared about your neighbors, maybe your church group, your union members. If you weren't actively reading the newspaper cover to cover or watching the nightly news, you simply weren't exposed to suffering far away. So empathy was perhaps narrower in scope, but maybe deeper within that close circle.
Okay, the 70s. Got it. Then what happens in the 80s?
Then we leap into the 1980s, the era of individualism and image. Big shift. This was the age of Reaganomics, peak Cold War tension, and the full-on embrace of success culture. Capitalism unbound almost. Cable TV was starting to spread, early home computers were emerging, and advertising just exploded.
The greed is good era, kind of.
In some ways, yeah. This decade really fostered performative confidence. Think of the whole yuppie archetype, the intense focus on Wall Street success, the self-made individual myth, lots of glamour, status symbols, maybe a bit of excess. Your personal confidence became really tied to your status, what you could buy, your outward image. It was often about, let's say, confidence in your brand, not necessarily in your depth.
Interesting distinction. And empathy.
Public empathy, interestingly, became quite curated in the 80s. You had these huge, visible efforts like Live Aid, big anti-drug campaigns, the start of AIDS awareness.
Right, very high profile.
Very, but they were largely top-down efforts, often quite moralistic, and typically mediated through big institutions and celebrities. It wasn't really driven by widespread personal awareness or grassroots activism in the same way we see today.
Okay, so curated empathy. Then the 90s, the bridge to the digital age.
Exactly. The 1990s, the era of transition and early connectivity, huge changes. The Cold War ended, dial-up internet sputtered into life.
I remember that sound.
Oh yeah. Cable TV exploded. Global pop culture, MTV, hip-hop, sitcoms like Friends or Seinfeld started really dominating. The information age was just beginning to glimmer. Confidence in this era. Still largely inward-looking, I'd say. Most people still lived without the constant comparison pressure we have now. Your sense of self-worth was judged more by your immediate local environment. But, and this is important, with rising media access, you start to see this slow, almost imperceptible erosion of contentment. People began glimpsing more of the world, more possibilities, more things to compare themselves to, and wondering where they fit in it all.
The beginnings of FOMO, maybe?
Sorta, yeah. A pre-digital version. And empathy definitely began to widen its scope. We started seeing more stories from the global south, more international news coverage, things like the Rwandan genocide or the wars in Yugoslavia were on our screens. But the engagement was still largely passive. You'd watch it on TV, maybe feel bad for a bit, maybe donate, but then you'd largely move on. Empathy increased in breadth, sure, but it was still not interactive yet.
Passive consumption. Okay, so then, the internet really takes hold in the 2000s and 2010s. What happens to confidence and empathy then?
That's when everything accelerates. Confidence became networked. Suddenly, you're seeing the carefully curated lives of seemingly everyone around you, first on MySpace, then Facebook, then Instagram. Your own confidence started to become derived from visibility, from validation, likes, comments, followers. We began actively building personas, not just reputations.
Right, the online self.
Exactly. And empathy became immediate. You could see suffering happening in real time on the other side of the world. You could comment instantly, donate with a single click, or just as easily scroll right past it. We were suddenly invited, almost obligated to care about everything, everywhere, all at once. But our actual human emotional capacity just couldn't sustain that constant onslaught.
Yeah, impossible.
So this created two things simultaneously. Empathy inflation, where the expectation for showing you care, for performing emotional labor went way up, and predictably widespread empathy fatigue, burnout, numbness.
Okay, so what were the big forces driving that massive shift?
Well, we can pinpoint several core causes. First, the sheer information explosion. We went from relative information scarcity to just overwhelming excess. Depth got replaced by speed and breadth. Second, algorithmic incentives. Platforms figured out that outrage, performative confidence, and public displays of empathy got clicks, got engagement, so they started actively rewarding that.
Right, feeding the beast.
Pretty much. Third, social atomization. Trust in traditional institutions, government, media, even experts continued to wither. This put more individual responsibility on us for figuring things out, for taking social action, which led to both incredible activism but also massive burnout. Fourth, identity externalization. The self became something you performed, something you curated, something to be liked. Confidence turned into a kind of personal brand management.
Oh, yeah, the personal brand.
And finally, fifth, emotional displacement. Being constantly exposed to huge systemic suffering, often without any real power to intervene effectively, leads to frustration or cynicism or just developing emotional calluses as a defense mechanism.
Wow, that's a really comprehensive breakdown of the forces at play. It clarifies so much about how we ended up here. And now that we're talking about the internet's full impact, let's dive even deeper into the really recent history. How did this play out specifically through the 2000s, the 2010s, and now into the 2020s? layering in the tech, the media, the whole social climate.
Okay, let's get granular, decade by decade, starting with the 2000s. The theme here was really the information awakening. It felt like, wow, we just got online. Confidence, it was still mostly rooted in the analog world in real life, but it was definitely starting to migrate into digital spaces. Early blogs, forums, empathy started expanding quite dramatically with our first real exposure to raw, unfiltered global content. Remember early YouTube? Live Leak. The incredibly raw footage from 9/11, major global disasters like the 2004 tsunami or Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah, very visceral, very immediate.
Exactly. Identity was still primarily local, tied to your physical community, but it was starting to stretch digitally. Access to information just exploded with things like Wikipedia, countless online forums, personal blogs. This created a kind of DIY info culture. Suddenly, anyone could publish anything.
Right, the gates were thrown open.
Which, predictably, led to a surge in what you might call pseudo-confidence. People speaking with real authority, even without deep expertise. Culturally, 9/11 obviously shifted our collective focus massively towards global terrorism. Local news still mattered, but cable news channels really started dominating and unifying national narratives around big events. Empathy was often very reactive, spiking around major crises.
And social media was just starting.
Just starting to emerge mid-decade, MySpace, early Facebook. But importantly, identity was still heavily tied to your real-world relationships, and crucially, the algorithmic feeds hadn't taken over yet. You mostly saw posts from people you actually chose to connect with. Pop culture saw the huge boom of reality TV, American Idol, Survivor. Movies offered escapism like Harry Potter or maybe existential dread with the Matrix sequels. But we also saw a new kind of quirky empathy in shows like Scrubs or The Office.
Yeah, those character-driven comedies.
Right. Key events shaping the decade. Obviously, 9/11 and the War on Terror, the rise of blogging culture, and Obama's 2008 election, which really showcased early online political organizing and a wave of perhaps temporary widespread optimism.
Okay, the 2000s, then the 2010s. Feels like things really accelerated then.
Oh, absolutely. The 2010s, I'd call this the age of identity and echo chambers. The theme shifts to basically we live online now. Confidence became way more externalized. It was increasingly measured by likes, retweets, follower counts, performance metrics. Empathy expanded dramatically again, often channeled through hashtags and viral activism campaigns. Think hashtag Connie2012 or the Ice Bucket Challenge. But it also quickly became more performative and often a battleground for competing ideologies.
The paradox you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. We plunged right into that paradox. Caring about more things theoretically, yet trusting each other and institutions significantly less. Information access exploded again. Podcasts took off. YouTube channels became huge sources of information and misinformation. Reddit forums thrived. This fueled the rise of the armchair expert and the continued collapse of traditional gatekeepers. You had wild conspiracies, slickly produced TED Talks, and intense social justice discourse all swirling together in the same feeds.
Information chaos, almost.
Pretty much. Global crises felt constant, but also strangely fleeting. Syria, climate change reports, the refugee crisis, hashtag #MeToo. They'd dominate the cycle for a bit, then fade. National polarization deepened dramatically, and local issues often got completely drowned out unless they somehow went viral.
And social media itself changed massively.
Huge transformation. Facebook went fully algorithmic. Twitter just exploded as the place for breaking news and hot takes. Instagram perfected visual curation. TikTok emerged late in the decade, hinting at the next shift. This was truly the era of influencer confidence, where even ordinary people could build huge platforms and perform authority, often based on lifestyle or personality rather than expertise.
Right, and the empathy wars.
Oh, yeah. That really kicked off. Call-out culture, cancel culture, constant debates about virtue signaling. It fundamentally reshaped how we interacted and expressed care or dissent online. Pop culture leaned hard into anti-heroes on TV, Breaking Bad, Game of Thrones. We saw meta-empathy explored in shows like Black Mirror. Movies started featuring more consciously inclusive narratives like Black Panther.
And the key cultural events.
Trump's presidency was huge, obviously. It solidified confidence within distinct echo chambers and turned empathy itself into a deeply politicized battleground. Alongside that, you had the massive impact of the hashtag #MeToo and Black Lives Matter movements and the escalating crisis of misinformation and disinformation that really defined the latter half of the decade.
Okay, which brings us uneasily to the present, the 2020s.
Right. The 2020s, the age of overstimulation and collapse. The theme feels like we're all online all the time, and honestly, it's just too much. Confidence now often feels, hollow. or maybe manic. It's either shouted through a filter of burnout or masked by carefully curated aesthetics online.
Yeah, I feel that. Performative wellness, maybe.
Exactly. And empathy is incredibly fluid, almost chaotic. It's expected everywhere. Brands have to show empathy, leaders have to, but
Right.
it often feels shallow or exhausted or purely reactive. You see people either disengaging completely, going numb, or over-engaging with rage, joining online dog pile.
That polarity again.
Right. Access to information is transformed again. AI is now fully in the ChatGPT, Midjourney, Sora reshaping creative spaces, blurring reality, raising huge questions about truth and authenticity. Our feeds are just flooded. Reels, shorts, deep fakes. It's this dizzying, relentless blur of emotion, speed, and repetition.
Yeah, overwhelming.
Totally. Local crises often feel invisible unless they get filmed and go viral. National divides seem deeper and more intractable than ever, often focused on cultural identity issues. And global empathy spikes around major events, Ukraine, Gaza, but they seem shorter-lived now, rarely translating into coordinated, sustained, long-term change.
And social media continues to evolve.
Constantly. TikTok's bite-sized, often ironic form of empathy is dominant. Parasocial relationships with creators are maybe more intense than ever. And the confidence economy is fully integrated. LinkedIn, Substack, Threads, TikTok. Everyone is encouraged, almost required, to be a brand, to perform expertise.
What about pop culture now?
It feels heavy on nostalgia, Stranger Things, endless reboots. We see a lot of genre blending and what some critics call trauma core stories like Euphoria or Everything Everywhere All at Once that are deeply focused on characters grappling with intense past pain and fragmented identities. Empathy itself often feels self-referential and aestheticized. Think about trends like the soft girl aesthetic, which emphasizes gentle, introspective vulnerability, or even the proliferation of mental health memes online.
Right, like packaging difficult emotions.
Yeah. And the key cultural events shaping this decade so far. The COVID-19 pandemic is obviously massive, that initial global empathy surge that quickly fractured into fatigue, anger, and deep politicization. The George Floyd protests in 2020 sparked unprecedented digital and physical outrage, but also highlighted deep divisions. AI's incredibly rapid evolution is constantly shifting the ground beneath our feet, and the culture wars just seem to be intensifying everywhere.
Phew, okay. So looking back across that whole progression, what's
Yeah.
the big takeaway?
I think it's clear the modern age didn't just create more empathy and more arrogance out of thin air. It made them faster, flashier, and intensely, relentlessly performative. We might care about more things, or at least signal that we care about more things, and we certainly shout about more things with more confidence. But we're also burning out much faster. It's like our technological tools for connection and information sharing improved exponentially, but our basic human capacity to truly digest complex emotions, sustain deep compassion, and exercise nuanced judgment has really struggled to keep pace.
That paints an incredibly vivid picture. And yeah, it is a bit sobering thinking about how we got here. But I want to push this just one step further. Empathy and confidence, as we've laid out, they feel like the visible symptoms, the outputs. What are the underlying inputs? What are the deeper fractures, the foundational issues we're truly grappling with beneath that surface layer?
That's exactly the right question. That's the crucial next layer of this deep dive. The deeper issue, the one you're sensing. I think it's a fundamental struggle to find and assign meaning in a world that feels increasingly fragmented, chaotic, and overwhelming. We are constantly exposed to everything. We're asked, implicitly or explicitly, to care about everything. And the systems we live in often reward us for appearing confident or appearing empathetic, but maybe not so much for truly being those things in depth. So the core inquiry really becomes, how do we navigate meaning, identity, and emotion in a world that is just oversaturated with stimulation, with signals, with demands on our attention and our feelings?
A crisis of meaning, almost.
You could frame it that way, yeah. And tied directly to that is a second profound issue, the collapse of trust. Think about it. Both genuine empathy and authentic, earned confidence rely fundamentally on trust. Trust in institutions to provide reliable information. Trust in other people that our empathy won't be exploited or mocked. Even trust in ourselves that our voice matters, that our perspective is grounded, that we can make sense of things.
Right. Trust is foundational.
Absolutely. And when that foundational trust breaks down, as it seems to have done in so many areas, people often resort to performance as a coping mechanism. Arrogance steps in to replace genuine confidence. Performative empathy replaces true presence and connection. And deep, corrosive cynicism often replaces genuine care or constructive criticism.
Okay, so loss of meaning, collapse of trust. What else?
Well, this leads us to a third, really deeply unsettling issue, the breakdown of shared reality. We used to operate, maybe imperfectly, but still with more unified storylines. A few trusted news anchors, maybe more widely shared cultural values or narratives.
Yeah, a common ground.
Exactly. Now, we're immersed in what some people call hyperpluralism. Everyone has a platform. Every single issue seems to have 40 different hot takes instantly available. Every personal experience, while valid in itself, is simultaneously challenged, deconstructed, politicized online. This creates what we can call epistemic insecurity, that constant nagging background question of what's really true anymore. It also fuels moral confusion. What's genuinely important? What's truly right to care about amidst all this noise? And it leads to deep identity instability. Who am I supposed to be in all of this dizzying chaos?
That feels very real, that sense of instability.
It does. And under these conditions, both empathy and confidence start to malfunction. They become fractured, they get commodified, turned into things to signal or sell. They even get gamified points for the best performance.
So if we want to get to the absolute roots of this, what should we be looking at?
To really get to the roots, I think we need to examine 6 absolutely foundational lenses. These are the underlying systems that shape how empathy and confidence even get expressed in the first place. These are attention, what we actually choose to notice or ignore, our capacity versus the demands, trust who or what we fundamentally believe, how we cope with uncertainty, authenticity, the constant tension between performance and sincerity, our curated versus our lived identity, belonging, our deep need for group identity, social cohesion versus feelings of alienation, agency, whether we feel we can genuinely act in the world or only react to it, and finally, narrative, the coherent story or lack thereof that we tell ourselves about the world and our place within it.
Okay, attention, trust, authenticity, belonging, agency, narrative. 6 big ones.
Exactly. Think of it this way. Empathy and confidence are often the output, what we see people expressing or projecting. But these deeper factors, how we manage our attention, who we trust, how authentic we feel we can be, where we find belonging, what sense of agency we possess, and what overarching story guides us, these are the fundamental inputs that truly shape those expressions.
Can you give an example?
Sure. For instance, if our attention is constantly fractured and scattered by notifications and feeds, our empathy might become shallow, reactive, maybe performative because we just don't have the focus for depth. Or if our sense of agency feels totally eroded, if we feel powerless, our confidence might morph into arrogant posturing as a defense. Or, conversely, it might just collapse into helplessness.
Okay, I see.
If our sense of belonging feels really conditional, like we only belong if we perfectly conform, our empathy might be withdrawn from anyone perceived as being outside our immediate tribe. If trust has completely crumbled, our confidence can become paranoid, maybe conspiratorial, or just aggressively defensive against any perceived threat.
Wow. Okay, that really reframes the whole issue.
Right. It brings us to a refined, maybe more poignant core inquiry for our times. In a world that's teeming with digital abundance, but often suffering from genuine emotional scarcity, how do we possibly cultivate authentic relationships, both with ourselves and with others, when the very systems we live in seem to both demand and distort confidence and empathy?
That's a huge question. And it makes me wonder, how exactly did these 6 foundational elements, attention, trust, authenticity, belonging, agency, narrative, get so broken, so fractured in the modern age? Let's take a really deep dive into each one of those.
Absolutely. Let's zero in on each lens. We'll look at what it is, maybe how it worked more or less before this digital saturation, how it specifically broke down, what often rushed in to replace it, and the symptoms we see playing out all around us today.
Okay, let's start with attention.
Right. Attention. The currency of consciousness. This is just our fundamental ability to focus. To focus long enough to truly understand something, to genuinely care about it, or to act effectively based on it. Before the internet really took over, our attention was largely shaped by our immediate physical environment, your home, your neighborhood, your work, the people right in front of you. News often came maybe once a day in a newspaper or on the evening broadcast. Your attention was maybe more like a slow, deep river, generally directed, flowing within certain limits.
That was peaceful.
Relatively speaking, maybe. But then the internet completely blew that up. It turned attention into a direct commodity, a resource to be mined. Every feed, every platform, every app started actively fighting for tiny fragments of your time, your focus. Infinite scroll, constant push notifications, those clever algorithmic nudges, they all atomized our attention into these disconnected micro moments.
Yeah, constantly interrupted.
Exactly. And what replaced sustained, deep focus? Often it was a dopamine-driven craving for novelty, for the next hit. Content got optimized purely for quick reaction, not reflection. And we developed this culture of Quantity over depth, skimming everything, mastering nothing. The symptoms today, they're stark. Widespread empathy fatigue because deep empathy requires sustained attention. The endless, mindless loop of doom scrolling, dramatically shorter reported attention spans, that pervasive background anxiety about missing something important, FOMO, and a real struggle for many to form truly deep or nuanced opinions because it takes focused time.
Okay. Attention is fractured. What about trust?
Next up, trust, the glue of society. This is our fundamental belief, right? In the reliability, the honesty, the basic truthfulness of people's systems or ideas. Before, trust was often maybe more hierarchical. We tended to trust established institutions, government, major news outlets, religious figures, scientific experts. It was also often very local and relational trust, earned through consistent proximity, shared experience, reputation within a community.
Right. You knew who you were dealing with.
Often, yes. But this began to fracture pretty significantly. You had a whole series of high-profile scandals, Watergate back in the 70s, major financial collapses later on, revelations about widespread political and corporate misinformation, clergy abuse scandals, all eroding trust in those very institutions. Then the internet arrived. And while it did democratize information in many ways, which is good, it also removed many of the traditional filtering mechanisms. Suddenly, it became incredibly hard to discern who or what to trust.
Yeah, expert versus influencer versus random person shouting online.
Exactly. Is it a legitimate expert or just a very persuasive influencer? A seasoned journalist doing deep investigation? Or just some random TikToker repeating a conspiracy theory? It's hard to tell. So what rushed in to replace that traditional, often earned trust? Well, often it was vibes-based trust based purely on gut feeling or shared emotional resonance, or whether someone feels authentic to you. We saw trust retreating into self-selected tribes. I trust my sources, my people, often over any kind of objective truth. And the creation of these highly personalized trust bubbles curated by my algorithm or my online community.
Right. The echo chamber reinforces trust within itself.
Precisely. Symptoms today. The alarming rise of conspiratorial thinking, the mainstreaming of alternative facts, deep, pervasive cynicism toward government, media, even science itself. And often a feeling of paralysis because we're bombarded with constantly conflicting information and don't know who to believe.
Okay, trust is broken. What about authenticity? How did that get warped?
Then there's authenticity, the performance of truth. This is fundamentally about the alignment between your inner self, what you genuinely think and feel, and your outer expression, how you present yourself to the world. Before, authenticity was largely maybe a more private affair. You naturally showed different sides of yourself in different roles at work, with family, with friends. Social masks were always a thing, a part of life, but they weren't constantly visible, documented, analyzed, and judged by potentially thousands of people.
Right, performance wasn't the default mode 24/7.
Exactly. Social media, however, fundamentally transformed identity into a continuous performance. Platforms began to explicitly reward visibility, engagement, a curated image, not necessarily sincerity or quiet consistency. The call to be real or be vulnerable online ironically became just another aesthetic to be carefully managed and performed, rather than a reflection of genuine emotional truth.
Curated vulnerability, that's a great term for it.
Yeah. So what replaced genuine alignment? Often it was that curated vulnerability. Carefully crafted personas designed specifically for likes, for followers, for building a personal brand. And alongside that, a pervasive cynicism towards anyone expressing sincere emotion online. Are they really feeling that or just performing? Today's symptoms. Rampant imposter syndrome, even among highly successful people. Immense pressure felt by almost everyone to build a personal brand, even in casual social interactions. A real blurring and confusion between genuine self-expression and calculated self-performance. And yes, even those inauthentic displays of empathy or outrage that seem used primarily to fit in or gain social capital.
Okay, authenticity is compromised. What about belonging? Number 4.
Fourth, we need to look at belonging, the need to be seen and held. This is our deep, innate human need to feel accepted, valued, included, part of a group, a culture, a community. Before, belonging was often strongly tied to physical places and embodied communities, your neighborhood, your church, your temple, your school, your workplace, your extended family. It wasn't always perfect or inclusive, of course, but it was tangible, embodied. You shared physical space.
You know where you stood, more or less.
Often, yeah. How it broke down. Well, globalization and the rise of digital life significantly weakened many of those traditional local ties. People moved more, communities became more transient, and online communities, while offering connection across distance, often lacked the physical presence, the shared history, or the real-world accountability of traditional groups. You could just leave if things got tough. And tragically, belonging itself increasingly became conditional online. It felt like you had to agree 100% with, or perfectly perform allegiance to, or constantly signal loyalty to a particular ideology or online group just to be accepted. Any deviation could mean expulsion.
The purity tests.
Exactly, those moral or ideological purity tests. So what replaced that more rooted, maybe more forgiving sense of belonging? Often it was intense identity politics, sometimes focused more on division than unity, algorithmic groupthink where the platform reinforces the group's norms, and the rise of these intense parasocial relationships with online creators or niche micro-communities, sometimes substituting for deeper real-world connections. Symptoms today: profound loneliness, even paradoxically amidst hyperconnectivity, a paralyzing fear for many of being canceled or publicly shamed for expressing a dissenting opinion or making a mistake, a retreat into ever tighter, more rigid echo chambers, and an over-reliance on digital tribes for a sense of self-worth and validation.
It's a fragile kind of belonging. Okay, number 5, agency. How did our sense of power break down?
Our fifth lens is agency, the power to act meaningfully. This is your fundamental belief deep down that your actions can genuinely make a difference, that you can change your environment, improve your life, or even contribute to changing the world around you. Before, agency often felt more directly tied to tangible actions. Your work, raising a family, participating in local politics, maybe protesting, casting your vote. The impact might have felt slow, effortful, maybe small, but often clearer and more direct. You could see the results, or lack thereof.
Right, cause and effect felt closer.
Exactly. But then systems became overwhelmingly complex and opaque. Global economics, climate change, the rapid evolution of AI, pervasive social injustice. These problems feel huge, interconnected, almost impossible for one person to grasp, let alone influence. Clicktivism, liking, sharing, signing online petitions often gave the illusion of taking action, but without necessarily impacting real-world structures or problems in a meaningful way. And the sheer burnout and overwhelm from constantly being exposed to these massive problems eroded many people's belief in their own personal impact. What can I possibly do?
That sense of helplessness is pervasive.
It really is. So what replaced that feeling of genuine agency? Often it was those symbolic actions, posting, liking, resharing as the primary form of engagement, a pervasive cynicism, or even nihilism, nothing matters anyway, and sometimes a tendency to outsource our hope entirely to large movements or charismatic influencers. They'll fix it. Symptoms today include widespread reports of depression and helplessness, a sense of rage that feels directionless or gets channeled into unproductive online conflicts, the addictive consumption of collapsed content media that focuses on impending doom, reinforcing despair, and maybe a longing for those small wins found in video games or apps that offer a feeling of simulated agency and control.
Simulated agency. Wow. Okay, finally, number 6, narrative, the stories we tell ourselves.
And finally, narrative, the story that makes it make sense. This is about having a coherent, overarching story, a framework about who we are, what truly matters, and where we're going, both as individuals and as a society. Before, dominant narratives often came from more established sources. Religion provided a cosmic story, national identity offered a collective story, clear political ideologies presented a story about progress or struggle. There was usually some kind of shared cultural storyline. Even if you chose to agree with it or rebel against it, there was something to push against.
A common framework, even if contested.
Exactly. But this whole concept of a shared narrative seems to have fractured into what we call narrative pluralism. Now, there are thousands upon thousands of competing stories, worldviews, aesthetics, moral frameworks, all vying for our attention simultaneously. Everyone's a storyteller online, everyone has their own truth, but there's no longer any broad agreement on the fundamental plot of reality. Fragmentation has replaced cohesion.
So many stories, no main story.
Precisely. What rushed in to replace those grand shared narratives? Often, it's been micro-narratives, small, self-contained stories tied to specific identities or online tribes. Meme-based ideologies that spread quickly but lack depth. Escapist world building. Finding meaning solely within fandoms or specific identity aesthetics. And these deeply personalized timelines, curated by algorithms, where everyone seems to be living in a slightly different, often conflicting reality. Symptoms today. Profound existential confusion. What does any of this actually mean? A pervasive irony culture and nihilism where maybe nothing is taken seriously, but also paradoxically a deep, almost desperate desire for structure and meaning seen in the popularity of things like astrology, personality typologies like Myers-Briggs, or rigid political tribes that offer clear answers and a sense of order. And of course, that deeply fractured sense of us versus them fueled by competing narratives.
Okay. So attention, trust, authenticity, belonging, agency, narrative, all fractured in different ways. That's a lot.
It is a lot. In essence, what seems to be broken is the fundamental scaffolding of shared human experience. How we focus our minds, who and what we trust, how we express our true selves, where we find genuine connection, our belief in our ability to act, and the stories that give our lives meaning and coherence. We are, as you said, absolutely saturated with access to information, but often starving for coherence. We're louder than ever before, projecting ourselves constantly, but often feel lonelier than ever. We know more facts, we're exposed to more suffering, and thus maybe care more on some level, but paradoxically, we often seem to believe less in institutions, in each other, maybe even in the future.
And how did it all break? Not one thing, you're saying.
No, not in one single dramatic moment. It happened, and is still happening, in cascading waves. Technology rapidly disrupted our sense of time, space, and connection. Our existing institutions often failed to adapt quickly enough, or worse, actively eroded trust through their actions. Capitalism, in its relentless drive, began turning everything, even our identity, our relationships, our empathy, into content to be packaged, marketed, and consumed. Global crises kept colliding with our personal lives and identities, leading to overwhelm and burnout. And we as humans adapted in the ways we could often, fragmented, reactive, and, as we've discussed, frequently performative ways.
That diagnosis is incredibly clear. Yes, it's truly sobering to hear it laid out like that. But now that we understand the fracture, the obvious crucial next question is, how do we begin to repair it? This isn't about, fixing all of society overnight, of course. That feels impossible. But maybe it's about reclaiming some agency at a personal level, because that feels like where real transformation has to start, right, in our own lives. How can we take action on these 6 fractured systems ourselves?
Exactly. This is where we pivot. We shift from diagnosis to intentional action. What can you do? So let's revisit each of those 6 fractured systems. But now, for each one, I want to offer a practice, a core mindset shift or approach to start mending it, and then a very concrete daily strategy, a practical habit or action you can actually adopt starting today.
Okay, actionable steps. I like it. Let's start with attention again. How do we fix our fractured attention?
Okay, attention moving from scattered to sacred. We know the fracture. Our attention is constantly hijacked by devices, by manufactured urgency, by that endless stream of algorithmically chosen content. We scroll, we react, we quickly forget. The practice here is to begin reclaiming your attention as a truly sacred act. Treat it like your most precious, non-renewable resource. Consciously choose depth over those quick, shallow dopamine hits, and intentionally create rituals of focus in your day.
Okay, treat attention as sacred. What does that look like day to day?
The daily strategy could be summed up as one thing at a time. Seriously. Pick one task, one conversation, one article, one piece of music for a specific window, maybe an hour, maybe just 15 minutes, and give it your full, undivided attention. No multitasking. Block out sacred phone-free windows in your day, even just 15 to 30 minutes for focused work, quiet reflection, or just being present. And use tech boundaries proactively. Try grayscale mode on your phone, set app time limits, ruthlessly turn off non-essential notifications. And maybe the most powerful thing is to regularly ask yourself this provocative question. What is truly worthy of my attention right now? Not just what's immediately available or allowed.
I love that. What's worthy of my attention? Okay, number 2, trust. How do we move from cynicism back towards discernment?
Right, trust. From cynicism to discernment. The fracture is that constant feeling of not knowing who or what to believe, feeling overwhelmed by too many conflicting voices, hidden agendas, potential misinformation. The practice here is to intentionally build conscious trust hierarchies in your life. Who do you trust? On what topics and why? Learn to separate your immediate emotional reactions, I like this, from genuinely credible evidence is actually reliable, and make a conscious choice to invest your trust slowly, carefully, and relationally based on demonstrated consistency and integrity, not just charisma.
Building trust hierarchies.
Okay?
And the daily strategy.
For a daily strategy. First, consciously curate a small, trusted circle of sources. Maybe it's a short list of specific journalists, thinkers, publications, or even just wise friends whose judgment you've learned to rely on. Don't try to drink from the fire hose of all information. Second, before you hit share on any piece of information online, pause. Just pause and ask yourself, do I truly trust this information, or do I just like that it confirms something I already believe or feel? Be honest. And third, actively practice relational trust. Show up consistently and reliably for the people in your actual life. Be trustworthy. And allow them the space to show up for you, building trust through mutual action over time. The provocative thought here is, do I primarily want to feel confirmed, or do I genuinely want to be informed?
That's a sharp distinction. Okay, number 3, authenticity. How do we get from performance back to alignment?
Third, authenticity, from performance to alignment. The fracture, remember, is that constant pressure we feel to curate our identity for others, making genuine sincerity feel risky, vulnerable, or sometimes just uncool. The practice is to actively work on aligning your inner voice, what you genuinely think and feel, with your outer choices and expressions. Allow honesty to be a small, steady, and deeply personal act, not necessarily a grand public declaration or performance. Focus on internal consistency over external validation.
Alignment, not performance. What's a daily habit for that?
A daily strategy could be to do a quick internal mask check before you post something significant online or before you engage in an important conversation. Am I showing up as myself here, or am I primarily showing off for others? Just notice. Try spending just 5 minutes journaling each day, completely uncensored, just for your own eyes. Let your real thoughts and feelings flow without judgment. And maybe try to name one core value or genuine emotion you want to embody or express that day, not as part of your brand, but as a quiet guiding truth for yourself. The core question becomes, am I performing right now, or am I truly present?
Am I performing or present? Powerful. Okay, fourth, belonging. How do we find rooted belonging instead of conditional belonging?
Fourth, healing belonging from conditional to rooted. The fracture is that feeling like you only belong if you agree with every single belief of the group or if you perfectly perform a specific identity. This leads to that deep loneliness, even when surrounded by online connections. The practice is to actively seek out, or maybe even consciously create, micro-communities, small groups, online or offline, where you feel you can genuinely be your whole self, imperfections and all, and crucially, where you commit to offering that same unconditional acceptance and space to others.
Micro-communities.
Okay.
Daily action.
For a daily strategy, try sending just one meaningful message each day. Not a quick like, but a heartfelt thank you. A genuine check-in on a friend, a specific invitation to connect with someone. Actively invest time and energy in place-based community, if possible. Join a local club. Volunteer for a cause you care about in your town. Explore a hobby that involves interacting with people in person. Physical presence matters. And seek or create what sociologists call a third space, a place, whether online or offline, that isn't home or work, where you feel you can just be without the constant pressure to explain or justify yourself. The key question to ask is, where can I show up today without feeling the need to either shrink myself down or shout to be heard?
Where can I show up without shrinking or shouting? I love that. Okay, fifth, agency. Moving from numbness back to feeling like we can have an impact.
Fifth, reclaiming agency from numbness to impact. The fracture is that pervasive feeling like nothing you do truly matters. The world's problems are just too vast, too complex, and you have far too little control. It leads to paralysis. The practice here is to intentionally shrink the frame. Stop trying to fix everything everywhere all at once. Focus your energy and actions on the areas where your hands can actually reach, where you can have a tangible effect. And learn to measure your progress not in achieving unattainable perfection, but in your genuine presence, your consistent effort, your small contributions.
Shrink the frame. Act where you can reach.
Got it. Daily strategy. A daily strategy is to consistently apply Stephen Covey's concept of the sphere of control or circle of influence. Actively identify what you can genuinely influence today, your own actions, your responses, your immediate environment, and focus your energy there. Consciously practice letting go of the need to control things far outside that sphere. Make a point to celebrate tiny micro-wins, finishing a difficult task, having a brave conversation, learning something new, helping someone in a small way. Acknowledge your own efficacy and practice embodied action regularly. Cook a meal from scratch. Clean or organize a physical space. Build something with your hands. Take a long walk and notice your surroundings. These simple physical acts powerfully remind you that you can shape your immediate world even in small but meaningful ways. The guiding question is, what is genuinely mine to carry today and what is not?
What's mine to carry today? That feels manageable. Okay, finally, number 6, narrative. How do we move from fragmentation to coherence?
And finally, mending narrative, from fragmented to coherent. The fracture is that feeling of being overloaded with competing stories, conflicting aesthetics, bewildering moral signals, so that nothing in the world seems to make full, satisfying sense anymore. It's disorienting. The practice is to begin consciously writing your personal myth or narrative, not as a way to rigidly control life or predict the future, but as a tool to better understand your past, make sense of your present, and navigate your future with more intention. Use narrative to honor your growth, your resilience, your evolving values, not just to escape reality.
Writing your personal myth. Interesting. How do we do that daily?
The daily strategy could be to keep a simple, ongoing timeline of your own life. Just occasionally jot down key turning points, significant chapters, influential people, moments of insight or challenge. Seeing your life visually laid out can reveal patterns and themes. Try ending each week by writing down a simple 3-sentence story of that week. What did I learn? How did I genuinely feel? What, if anything, changed for me? It builds coherence over time. And intentionally use media wisely. Be conscious about the stories you consume. Choose books, films, podcasts, articles that seem to add coherence, depth, and insight to your understanding of the world and yourself, rather than just adding to the noise, confusion, or fragmentation. Ask yourself, what kind of story am I actively living right now, and is it one I truly want to keep telling?
What kind of story am I living? Wow. These 6 practices and strategies feel incredibly empowering, actually.
That's the goal. To offer a final reflection on all this, while the world around us may well continue to be chaotic, complex, maybe even fractured, these 6 areas, attention, trust, authenticity, belonging, agency, and narrative, these are your most powerful personal levers for change. You don't need to fix everything outside of you. You likely can't. Instead, you can consciously choose to protect your attention, to carefully filter and invest your trust, to speak and act from your authentic truth, to actively seek and cultivate genuine belonging, to reclaim your sense of personal power in small ways, and to intentionally tell your own coherent story. When you diligently, consistently tend to these foundational aspects of your inner and outer life, that deep fracture we've been discussing actually begins to close. Maybe not universally out there in the whole world, but locally, personally, meaningfully, right where you live.
That feels hopeful.
It is hopeful. So the core takeaway from this whole deep dive is really this. In a world that feels increasingly fractured by overstimulation, pervasive mistrust, and the constant pressure to perform, true healing and resilience begin by reclaiming what is absolutely within your reach: your attention, your trust, your authenticity, your belonging, your agency, and your personal narrative. The modern world often rewards speed, superficial noise, and outward appearance. That's just how the incentives are often structured. But a truly meaningful, grounded, and resilient life, I believe, is built on the opposite: on deep focus, on unwavering truth, on genuine connection, on meaningful action, and on a coherent, evolving story. By tending to these 6 areas intentionally, day by day, you don't just survive the relentless noise, you actually begin to create islands of coherence in the chaos. You become someone others can genuinely trust, someone who feels grounded in reality, someone capable of empathy that is profoundly real, and confidence that is truly earned through competence and integrity. It's definitely not about trying to go backwards to some imagined simpler time. That's impossible. It maybe wasn't even better. It's about consciously remembering what core human needs might have gotten lost or distorted along the way, and then choosing daily, intentionally, to build them back into our lives, maybe differently this time, and hopefully even better.
Build it back differently and better. That's a powerful note to end on. Thank you so much for walking us through that, and thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We truly hope these insights offer you some clarity, maybe some resonance, and perhaps most importantly, some actionable steps as you navigate our incredibly complex, sometimes bewildering, but also amazing world. We look forward to our next exploration of fascinating topics together.